Okay, you got me. This is a clickbait title, but it's a topic I really want to talk about. You see, on YouTube, there's no shortage of Westerners saying they moved to Russia because of its conservative, traditional family values. And those YouTubers have existed for quite a while now, but this type of YouTuber has really become more common in the last 3 years, especially since the start of what here in Russia they call the special military operation. If you're in an English speaking country watching this, which you probably are, you would call this the Russo-Ukrainian War. Nowadays, especially over those last 3 years, there's really no shortage of videos with titles declaring Russia to be the last bastion of Christian tradition, or titles stating that someone from the UK or the US left the West because it's woke and Russia isn't. And if you're a regular viewer of this channel, of my channel, you'll know that's not my story. I'm not conservative. In the UK, I'd be called a regular Labour voting lefty. In the US, probably something ludicrous like far left, or slapped with some pejorative, oxymoronic insult like extreme liberal, something like that that makes no sense. But I believe in climate action, universal healthcare, workers' rights, gender equality, all of the topics you'd expect someone with my political profile to support. There are very few, if any at all, conservative policies that I personally support. And yet, I live here in Russia, and I've been here almost 8 years in August, and I really like it. Now, before we go any further in this video, I want to be very clear about something. I know how the reaction to this video will be. I've been in this YouTube game for a while now, and saying something like, I like living in Russia in 2025 is basically asking to be called a useful idiot. And saying something like, Moscow is a great city to live in, is enough to get you labelled naive or brainwashed or worse. And I'm not here to defend anything. I'm not here to support anything, actually. I'm definitely not going to deny that there are real issues here in Russia. I live here. I see it every day. I'm not blind to that. And of course, neither are Russian people, by the way. Anyway, so what I'm saying is, however, that real life here in Russia, in Moscow, here in St. Petersburg, where I am today, the everyday experience of living in a place, living in a city, living in a country is often far messier and more surprising and more human than the ideological boxes we try to cram it into. And that's what this video is about, because Russia might be marketed nowadays as a conservative paradise. And despite everything, as a progressive, personally, I found that Russia really works for me. And that's not in theory, that's in practice. And I want to talk honestly about why me, as a progressive, likes living here in Russia. And I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not saying that everyone should move to Russia. In fact, it takes a very particular kind of left-winger to want to live here. There are lots of people I know who are on my side of the political spectrum who won't move to Russia out of principle because they don't agree with what the country is doing on the international stage. In Ukraine, for example. And okay, fine, if that's you, it's probably not a good idea to move here. And other people I know are concerned about real deficits in rights and protections that make life here genuinely untenable for many people. If you belong to a group that's especially vulnerable, whether that's because of your identity, your activism or other circumstances, then I'll be honest, moving to Russia, well, this might not be a great place for you to live, regardless of your politics, if you're left or right. And there are people I deeply care about, people who I love, who I would never in a million years recommend to move here, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But there are many other people, many people who are similar to me, politically, progressive, left-leaning people, who I think would have a brilliant time living in Russia, in Moscow, in St. Petersburg. They'd absolutely love it. So I think if you're someone who can navigate the realities that I mentioned in this video, and perhaps you're someone who cares less about ideology and more about the practical aspects of day-to-day life, then you might find Russia better than you expect. Because the thing is, in general, when people in the West picture Russia, they normally imagine one of two extremes. To liberals, it's homophobic, it's authoritarian, it's cold, it's grey, it's stuck in the past. To conservatives, it's a utopia, it's traditional, God-fearing, anti-woke, and free from the madness of Western modernity. And both of those are, of course, total cartoons. Neither gets at the reality of everyday life here, especially in a cosmopolitan, diverse, multicultural city like Moscow. And, you know, here is where this video really gets interesting, because I'm going to be very honest with you right now. Lots of the Western conservatives who move here, many of whom make videos here on YouTube. They have YouTube channels. They actually very quickly begin to love their life in Russia after they move here, and that's not for its traditional lifestyle or its family values. It's actually because on the opposite side, they very quickly begin to appreciate things that are ironically very left-wing. All right, I got disturbed by someone asking me where I'm from. So I'll continue now. So these people who move here, they very quickly, as I said, begin to appreciate things that are left-wing. They come onto YouTube and they praise things they absolutely hate in their home country. Things they would slam and attack for being socialist. For example, immigrants here, especially from the US, quickly begin to rave about the universal healthcare system, how they can get injured or ill and have to pay absolutely nothing. They love the government-subsidized public transport here, fast, clean, reliable, cheap. They appreciate the sense of safety they feel here, but back home, they think everyone needs a gun to be safe. They rave about the low cost of living and moan about inflation back home, despite inflation being more than 20% here, far more than it is in their home countries. They talk about how amazing it is that you can get groceries delivered to your apartment in 15 minutes. What they don't mention, however, is that is being done by an underpaid Tajik migrant worker riding an electric bike through the snow. And that's the exact kind of low-wage immigration they demonize back home. They talk against immigration back home, but here, without those people, those cheap deliveries can't happen. And neither can many of the other things they like, such as cheap taxis or super clean streets, which are, of course, cleaned by migrants on incredibly low wages in the middle of the night. They'll brag online about how affordable it is to hire a cleaner or a nanny. But again, that affordability exists because of an enormous reliance on immigrant labor, especially from Central Asia. Russia has like semi-open borders with half of the former Soviet Union, and many people here live very comfortably because of that cheap labour. In other words, mass migration. A thing many of them claim to be escaping back home. So while they're posing as anti-liberal, anti-socialist, anti-left-wing, and they're sat in their gated communities, they're enjoying the benefits of state-subsidised infrastructure, cheap migrant labour and big government, the exact things they've spent their lives complaining about and moaning about back home. And here's something you won't hear them say out loud either. A lot of the Western conservative people who move here, including influencers talking about traditional values in Russia, they're not living those values themselves. They don't go to church every Sunday. They didn't wait until marriage to have sex. They don't live spotless, morally upright lives, and that's fine. Neither do I. I'm not judging anyone for being human. The main difference is I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. I'm not selling a lie. And in many cases, it's not just hypocrisy. It's a strategy. It's branding. They're selling a product. They figured out that if you say all the right things about family, about tradition, about Western decay, you'll get so many clicks on YouTube. You'll get shares, you'll get sponsorships, and sometimes even state funding. And I'm not talking about the people who come here with big families. Of course, they're living the life they say they're living, which of course I respect because they're being honest. I actually get on with a few of those guys. I mean, we certainly aren't the same politically. I mean, not even close, but they aren't hypocrites. But there are hypocrites. There are foreigners out there who make a living here on YouTube selling an image of Russia that they don't personally live themselves. They're being paid to do it. They're being paid to do it. That's not me, but I won't criticize anyone for getting their bag, right? I'm not complaining they're getting paid. I've taken money from people I wasn't really proud to be working with too. But even then I did my best to speak honestly, to be myself, to never twist my worldview to make it more marketable. So I'm not really criticizing them for taking money, but it's fakeness, really. That's the difference, and I think that matters. And of course, I'm actually not here to sugarcoat things about life in Russia. Of course, there are real problems here. There are red lines you really cannot cross, and people do get punished for crossing them. That is real, of course. That matters. But the mistake a lot of Western liberals make when they talk about Russia is assuming that the entire society reflects the political reality, and it doesn't. The ideology at the top of the country just doesn't define daily life. It's just like in the West, where governments say one thing, society does another. Russia, like that, is full of contradictions. I'm sure in your country it's the same. You see things your politicians say, but the reality in front of your eyes, the one you see every day, the one you live every day, is totally opposite. In Russia, yes, the state pushes a conservative message, but walk around Moscow or here where I am today, St. Petersburg, and you'll see strong female leaders not sat at home looking after the kids, but running major businesses. You'll see young people dressed however they like, according to the local latest trends, and it's certainly not conservative. You'll see same-sex couples in cafes sat together. You'll see gender-neutral bathrooms. You'll see brothels. And yes, you'll see gay clubs. They all exist. That's all real. Because the reality of Russia is that people are far more tolerant than you have been led to believe. People aren't as aren't as ideologically strict as you think. Most Russians I know are not sat at home obsessing over Western degeneracy. They're worrying about rent, about jobs, about family. They're getting on with life, just like everybody else all over the world. And there's actually a quiet tolerance here that you don't expect. For the most part, if you steer clear of trouble with the authorities, normal people just let each other live. You're not going to have like fun pride celebrations like I went to in London and once in New York. But most people aren't under constant fire for who they are either. So of course it's not a utopia, but it's not a dystopia either. If you're someone who actually cares about things like healthcare, public services, infrastructure, education, you'll find a lot in Russia that's actually more progressive than the stereotypes allow. In fact, if you strip away the politics, you strip away the flag waving, the slogans, the international headlines, and look really just how daily life here functions, you'll find lots of surprising stuff. Russia in practice, in everyday life, is often far more progressive than people in the West realise. And I'm not talking about rhetoric, and I'm not talking about the media, and I'm certainly not talking about the reports you're going to see produced by Western human rights organisations and places like that. I'm talking about the day-to-day reality. That's different. In the basic systems, really, that shape people's everyday life, I want to touch on a few topics about that before this video finishes. For example, public transport, right? This is absolutely vital for me, for someone who cares about the climate agenda, which is a typically progressive cause, and I really care about the environment, which is part of the reason I came to St. Petersburg on train instead of flying. In Moscow, I'd never drive because I don't need to. The metro is, well, it's one of the best in the world. It's the best I've ever tried. Fast, clean, beautiful, absurdly frequent. At rush hour, trains come every 90 seconds, I think. You don't have to plan your trip around some sort of timetable. You just show up and a train arrives. You tap your phone to enter, or you have a Troika card which works for the metro, buses, trams, suburban trains. I mean, there's even an app which tells you where everything is in real time, where your bus is, where your train is. And of course, if you miss the last metro train, there are night buses that follow the same route. So if you're a lefty like me, you're someone who cares about sustainable urbanism, reduced car use, climate goals, this is what success really looks like. What about affordable healthcare? That's another key left-wing topic, including for me. Russia, as you might know, has a single-payer public healthcare system. Many people also get additional health insurance on top of that from their work. That's fairly common. And if you just use the public system, you don't pay for anything private, you can easily register at local clinics, see a doctor for free, get blood tests, prescriptions, referrals to specialists, all without paying a penny, a kopeck. If you need a minor surgery, that's covered. Prenatal care is covered. Hospital birth is covered. And of course, there are problems with it. Wait times can be long. Equipment quality, to be charitable, I'm going to say it varies. I've seen some really old gear. But if you're comparing it to the US, where an ambulance can like literally bankrupt you, it's a totally different world. There's also a thriving private sector if you want faster service, better service. And in my opinion, it sure counts as affordable. You can see a top specialist for $50. No insurance, no paperwork needed. You just book online, show up, sign something, get seen. People do use it. even pensioners, even students, because it's affordable. In fact, really here in Russia, access to affordable healthcare isn't like a moral debate like it is in the UK. It's just a thing and it's expected. I guess another topic related to that is education, something which every progressive like me believes should be free. Of course, Russian state schools are free and universities are mostly free. If you got good grades in school, you can study medicine, law, physics, languages without paying a cent of tuition. You might even get a monthly stipend. I mean, I've got friends, Russian doctors in their 20s, zero debt, no crushing student loans hanging over their head for the next 20, 30 years. Compare that to my home country, the UK, where you graduate with £50,000 in debt for, a humanities degree. Or compare it to the US, where entire generations of families are locked out of home ownership because they studied a subject with no real job prospects and they spent six figures on it. There are a whole list of other topics I could go on mentioning that are very left-coded. I think I'll touch on one more. Russia has very generous parental support. So if you have a kid, this parental support is a key part of Putin's pronatal policies, and it means that there's very good maternity leave, your jobs are legally protected, as well as extra payment called Materinsky Kapital for those with kids. You get free kindergartens, subsidized after school care and summer camps. So if you're trying to raise a kid without going completely broke or quitting your job, this is sort of what that looks like. Of course, raising kids is expensive, but it of course helps. Now, does that mean everything's perfect? I need to say again, of course not. Russia has widespread poverty, corruption, inequality, regional disparities. There are a lot of issues that deserve criticism. But I've lived in the UK, I've travelled all around Europe and a lot of the world. I've seen how things work elsewhere. So I'm not saying that Russia is a progressive, liberal dream. Of course it's not. But I can tell you that in terms of actual day-to-day life, Russia is more progressive than people assume. Actually far more socialist than many Western democracies. You can say that this is all part of, bread and circuses, keeping people happy. But if we avoid the political motivations of this and we talk about what's actually left, the realities of how things work for real people, there are many hallmarks of left-wing government. So if you're a Western liberal, then you might find, ironically, that modern Russia ticks a lot of the boxes that you're looking for. I mean, it doesn't advertise itself that way. It doesn't speak the language of progressivism in its marketing. And of course, in many ways, personally, it falls way short of my progressive ideal. But it does deliver on a lot of the progressive fundamentals. And maybe that's an uncomfortable truth for both anti-Russia Western liberals and pro-Russia, conservative traditional types. It doesn't fit into how they stereotypically see the country. And I guess that's where the irony really kicks in. You've got conservatives moving to Russia to escape the woke liberal West, only to end up living on the fruits of immigration, cheap immigration, free healthcare, strong public transport, affordable childcare, and government subsidised housing programs. For example, they marry a local, they have a kid, and now they've qualified for a subsidised family mortgage. Instead of paying 22-23% a year, they pay 5 or 6. And that is a good left-wing program. They tell themselves they're escaping stuff like this when they move to Russia. But in reality, they're enjoying the results of policies that in literally any Western context would be branded as socialist. They're too wrapped up in their anti-woke nonsense slogans to recognise it. Meanwhile, you've got liberals in the West writing off Russia as some backwards, unlivable hellscape autocracy without realising that in practice the day-to-day structure of life here, and again, I'm not talking about the politics, I'm not talking about foreign policy, but the day-to-day life looks in many cases, not all, but in many cases, a lot more like what progressives in their home country say they want, but it exists here. Accessible education, free or low-cost medicine, decent maternity leave, affordable cultural life, good state services, no billion-dollar insurance industry standing between you and a doctor. Of course, you can't say that really out loud. I mean, I am, but most people would be afraid to, because to say anything positive about life here in Russia, especially as a left-winger, is almost taboo. Even when, like in this video, it's couched in all these disclaimers about reality, a real healthy dose of realism here. But that's exactly why this video needs to exist, because the truth is complicated. It doesn't fit neatly into anyone's ideology, and maybe it never did. And I think maybe that's a part of why I actually really enjoy living here. There's a strange kind of freedom in being somewhere that doesn't cater to your personal politics. You sort of stop thinking in terms of tribes and talking points, especially as a foreigner. And you know, anyone who's in the West knows just how much life and politics has turned into tribal warfare, and you do feel it more when you're a citizen of that country. Here, if you're a foreigner in Russia, you can just live. You figure things out based on what works, not on what aligns with your personal worldview. And what works for me is a country where I don't need a car, where I can see a good quality, well-qualified doctor without going bankrupt, where I can afford to go to the theatre, eat out and pay rent all in the same month. Of course, this comes with compromises. There's no denying that. But for me, and many others, it's a very comfortable life. You see, Russia is not a left-wing country, no doubt. But it's also not the conservative playground people pretend it is. And it's full of contradictions, and that's exactly what makes it interesting. So, why am I making this video? It's not to say Russia is perfect, it certainly isn't. There are things here that frustrate me deeply. There are issues that I care about that are really hard to talk about openly, and I wouldn't do it in a video. I'm not naive to the system, and I'm not making excuses for the negative parts of it. But I'm also not going to lie. I live here, I built a life here, and that life, for someone with progressive values, is not just tolerable, it's good. And if you judge a society by hashtags or social media talking points, for Western liberals, Russia is definitely going to fail your test. But if you judge it by the on-the-ground outcomes, by access, by affordability, by quality of life, then there's a lot more complicated story to tell, and I think it's important to tell it. I mean, I'm not saying every left-winger or centrist liberal type should pack up and move to Russia, but I am saying that maybe, just maybe, the world isn't as binary as it's made out to be, and there's more overlap than we think, and maybe it's worth paying attention when things don't exactly fit the script you've been fed. So thanks very much for watching. I know this was a bit of a curveball. If it surprised you or challenged your assumptions, please let me know in the comments. I'm really looking forward to hearing back from you. I'd love to hear people who disagree with me. I know there's going to be lots of you Russian people and Westerners. Let's talk about it. It's a really interesting topic. I love living here, and I'm being honest. Bye.